He fired a man in front of hundreds of people. Not backstage. Not in a quiet hallway after the show. Right there mid-performance, in front of a packed house, while the music was still playing. The musician had taken a single sip of alcohol before stepping on stage. That was it. No warning. No second conversation. One sip, and the man's name was erased from the band as if he had never stood on that stage at all. The audience saw it happen. They just never understood what it meant. Because Lawrence Welk, the man who smiled for 30 years in front of the entire country, who waved his baton gently and called everyone his family, who built an empire on the idea that music should feel like champagne bubbles floating through a Sunday evening. That man was two completely different people, and almost no one ever saw both of them at the same time. This is the story of both. Before there was a television show, before there were champagne bubbles and big orchestras and a household name, there was a farm in North Dakota. Winter so brutal that water froze in the basin every morning, and a boy who did not fit. Lawrence Welk was born in 1903 in Strasburg, North Dakota, the sixth of 8 children in a family built entirely around survival. His parents had come from Russia, Germans who had settled near Odessa, who had lost their first child to famine, who had packed what they could carry and crossed an ocean to start again on land that offered nothing except the chance to begin. They built that chance with their hands, and they expected their children to do the same. Every morning before school, there was work. Every afternoon after school, more work. In the summer, the field swallowed 12 hours of daylight and asked for more. This was not cruelty. This was the only way a family like his stayed alive. And every one of his siblings seemed to understand it instinctively, the rhythm of the farm, the logic of what needed to be done, and when. Lawrence did not. He was not lazy. He was not defiant. He simply did not belong to that place the way the others did. He could not read machinery the way his father could. He did not find his footing in the daily rituals of farm life. In a family where everyone had a purpose that was clear and visible, he was the one who could not quite locate his. No one said it out loud. It was not that kind of family. But the difference was there every day, quiet and persistent, impossible to ignore. Then, at 11 years old, his appendix nearly killed him. He survived, but the recovery took almost a year. For a boy whose life had been measured in labor, suddenly there was nothing but stillness. No fields, no machinery, no rhythm to fall into. Just a house, a living room, and in that living room, an organ and his father's accordion. No one told him to pick them up. There was no teacher, no lesson plan, no moment where someone said, "This is what you should do with your life." There was just a boy with too much time and too much silence, and one afternoon he pressed a key, and the sound that came back was the first thing that had ever felt entirely like his own. He spent months in that room. The sounds became less scattered. They found rhythm. They stayed longer each day. And by the time his body healed and the world outside resumed its demands, something had shifted inside him that would not shift back. He had found the only clock he would ever truly know how to read. By 17, Lawrence Welk had a proposal for his father. He wanted a $400 accordion, an enormous sum in that era, in that household. In exchange, he would stay on the farm for 4 more years, work every day, and hand over every dollar he earned from playing music to the family. No rebellion, no ultimatum. A business arrangement offered quietly, accepted quietly, and honored completely. When he turned 21, he left. Not dramatically, not with anger. He had paid what he owed, and now there was a train to board and a direction that had been waiting for years for him to walk toward it. What came next was not glamorous. It never is in the beginning. He moved through small towns, playing wherever someone would have him, dusty dance halls with wooden floors that vibrated under your feet, ballrooms so intimate the audience could see the sweat on his hands, radio stations where the only feedback was a ringing telephone. He could not read music fluently. In a world of trained musicians, he learned everything by ear, listening, remembering, repeating until his hands knew the shape of a song the way other men knew it from a page. He was not the most technically gifted musician in any room he ever entered. He knew this. And instead of fighting it, he turned it into something else entirely. He watched. While other musicians played, Lawrence Welk studied rooms. He noticed when feet slowed and when they quickened. He noticed which songs made couples lean toward each other and which ones made them drift apart. He noticed the precise moment an audience lost interest, not in a loud way, but in the quiet way that crowds do, that almost imperceptible shift in energy when a room starts thinking about the door. He learned to prevent that shift. Song by song, night by night, he built a method, not based on musical theory, but on human behavior. What keeps people here? What brings them back? What makes them feel, when they leave, that something good just happened to them? In 1925, a seasoned performer named George T. Kelly showed him the architecture of a show, how to open, how to hold attention, how to make a performance feel inevitable rather than assembled. It was the last formal lesson Lawrence Welk would ever need. After that, everything he learned came from the audience itself. The name came accidentally, the way the best names do. It was 1938, a hotel performance in Pittsburgh, and a radio man in the audience listened to the band play and said the music was like champagne, light, bright, easy to approach, with a fizz that didn't overwhelm. Lawrence Welk did not manufacture the description. He just kept it. He understood immediately that it was worth more than any genre label, because it described a feeling, and feelings are what audiences remember long after the songs have faded. Champagne music became his brand before anyone used that word. It spread ahead of him into towns he hadn't yet visited, into living rooms he hadn't yet entered. By the time television arrived, Lawrence Welk already had something most entertainers spend their whole careers trying to build. A sound people could recognize before the song even ended. But here is what the audience never saw. Behind that soft smile, behind the floating bubbles and the gentle baton, there was a system of control so complete it would have unnerved most people who witnessed it. Lawrence Welk did not leave anything to chance. Not the tempo, not the running order, not the behavior of his musicians off stage, not the energy in the room before the first note played. He read every letter his audience sent him. Thousands of them arrived each month, and he treated them not as fan mail, but as data. Song requests were tracked. Complaints about tempo were noted. Feedback about specific performers was filed and revisited. The next episode was shaped by what the previous audience had told him in ink. His musicians understood that working for Lawrence Welk meant working within a framework that had no exceptions. Professionalism was not a preference, it was a condition of employment. He had come from a world where failure to perform meant failure to eat, and that urgency never entirely left him, even when the money was no longer a concern. The man who fired a musician mid-performance for a single sip of alcohol was not being cruel. He was being exactly who he had always been, someone for whom discipline was not a tool, but a foundation. The paradox is what makes him worth understanding. He built an atmosphere of warmth and ease for millions of viewers while maintaining a backstage environment of near military precision. Both were real. Both were necessary to him. And the audience only ever saw one half. The other half of Lawrence Welk's double life had nothing to do with backstage discipline or firing musicians on the spot. It lived inside his own home. He had met Fern Renner when his name still lived mostly on local radio waves, before the television cameras, before the national audience, before the name meant anything beyond the Midwest. She heard him before she met him, through a radio in her dorm room, through stories passed between friends. When she finally stepped into the room where he performed, she did not see a man who had already arrived. She saw a man still climbing. He noticed her immediately. She did not make it easy. She kept her distance long enough that he had to keep returning, keep finding reasons to stay a few minutes longer after each show, keep adding one more sentence to a conversation she was not quite ready to continue. That was not a performance. That was the first time in his life that Lawrence Welk could not simply adjust his approach until the room responded the way he wanted. They married in 1931. 3 children came. A home took shape in California, warm and full of music in the way homes are when music is someone's profession rather than their hobby. It should have been the life that balanced everything else. But the show did not stop. The tours did not slow. The radio programs became television programs, and television programs became a national institution. and a national institution required a schedule that did not much care what night a father's children went to sleep or what time dinner had been set on the table. There were evenings when every chair was pulled out, every dish in place, and one seat stayed empty. No one mentioned it. The meal continued. The conversation moved around the absence the way water moves around a stone, not stopping, not breaking, just quietly reshaping. Lawrence Welk could read a room of 1,000 strangers and know within seconds what they needed from him. He could feel the precise moment an audience was about to drift and bring them back before they knew they had left. But inside his own house, there was no feedback mechanism. There was no system for measuring what was being lost in the accumulated weight of every missed dinner, every early departure, every night the children fell asleep before he came home. The marriage lasted. There was no scandal, no public break, no dramatic confrontation that outsiders could point to. Lawrence and Fern remained together until the end of their lives, and the surface of that life, seen from outside, was entirely intact. But two rhythms ran through that house in parallel for 30 years, never quite colliding and never quite aligning. One rhythm answered to an audience of millions and could always be adjusted, rehearsed, refined. The other rhythm, the quieter one, the one that held the smaller moments, had no rehearsal. What passed did not return. This was the life no camera ever captured. Not because it was hidden, but because no one thought to look for it in the space between the notes. In 1971, ABC dropped The Lawrence Welk Show. The network had decided the program was too old-fashioned, too disconnected from the audience the industry wanted to reach. The decision was made in New York in an office far from the people who had been watching the show every Saturday night for 16 years, and it was final. Lawrence Welk did not fight it. He did something more interesting. He looked at what he actually owned. Not the airtime, not the network slot, but the content itself. Decades of recorded performances. An orchestra. A production team. A loyal audience that had not gone anywhere just because a network said so. And he understood something that most television performers of his era never grasped. The show was not the same thing as the distribution system. One could be taken away. The other could not. He moved the program into syndication, selling it directly to local stations market by market. It was less glamorous. There was no single dramatic reversal, no triumphant comeback story for journalists to write. There was just a man who had grown up in a place where you built your own structures or you did not survive, quietly rebuilding a different kind of structure, one that no single network could dismantle with a single phone call. The show ran in syndication for another decade. When new episodes stopped in 1982, the reruns kept going, on PBS, on local stations, in living rooms where longtime viewers returned to familiar performances the way people return to songs they've known since childhood, not to discover anything new, but to find something that was already theirs. He died in 1992 at the age of 89. His estate, built across television, music publishing rights, and California real estate, exceeded hundreds of millions of dollars. The show continued to air after he was gone. The wooden house in Strasburg, North Dakota, where a boy once lay recovering from a near-fatal illness and discovered, in the silence of a living room, that he had a different clock inside him than everyone else, still stands. It has not been restored into something it wasn't. The cramped rooms, the rough floors, the evidence of a life built entirely by hand. All of it preserved, as close as possible to what it was when he was small and still trying to understand where he belonged. What Lawrence Welk built was not just a television show or a music empire. He built a system for understanding what audiences needed, for making content that outlived its original moment, for maintaining control in an industry that takes it from people constantly, and for surviving the removal of any single support without collapsing. But systems do not contain everything. The discipline that made him extraordinary on stage was the same discipline that made certain things unreachable in private. The attention he gave to millions of strangers every Saturday night was attention his own family sometimes had to learn to live without. He smiled for 30 years, and the smile was real. The warmth was real. The talent was real.